Hey, everybody. My name is Carl James, and welcome to this episode of Can I Have a Word, the podcast that explores the importance of language and the impact it has on our identity and the people we become. Now, in a world where we are constantly bombarded by noise, from people and responsibilities demanding our attention to endless phone alerts and notifications, there is a constant pressure to engage. And because of that pressure to be on and be available, the world seems to reward people who are extroverts, those who are constantly social, sharing all parts of their life, and have the ability to maintain a steady stream of social connections. But what if you just aren't wired to behave that way? What then? It's just not who you are. Today, we're going to explore what it means to navigate the world and your life in a way that isn't always seen as conventional, but is no less meaningful or intentional. This episode is for the introverts, and I'm very biased because I'm very much team introvert. So I'm very happy to have my friend, Darian Burton, on the podcast today. He is an equity strategist and writer and creator of the Perspectives for Progress newsletter. Darian, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thank you for having me, Carl. I'm very excited.
Glad to have you here. So I think to get things started, I always like to, get a little bit of background. And so I would like to ask you, what is the story of your name? Who named you? Is there a story there? Anything you want to share?
Well, I come from a single parent home, but I say that really it feels like I was raised in a co-op. And
Okay. Say more.
Yeah, not in any sort of wild sense of the imagination, but my uncles actually named me. So my first name is Darian, and my uncle's name is Daryl, and so he wanted a D name,
An offshoot.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
And my middle name is Lionel.
Okay.
And my uncle Cornelius kind of echoes, kind of rhymes.
So they took liberties, basically. They were like, we're going to put our stamp on this.
Yeah. So my mom let them pick the names. And that's what happened.
Amazing. And you grew up in the Midwest, right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
St. Louis?
So born in Centerville, which is near St. Louis.
Okay.
And then I spent most of my childhood in Bloomington Normal, Illinois.
Okay. Wow. All right. So we're just going to get right into it. Darian, can I have a word, please?
Yes. The word is quiet.
Okay. So in the very basic sense of the word, we know quiet can mean things like making little or no noise, to become silent, calm, or still. But I think today we're gonna play with what that means a little bit, particularly in terms of like personality traits. So how would you define quiet?
Yeah. Resolve. And I think when I think about quiet, I think about quiet resolve. And I think about those things together. I think about determination. My grandmother, who grew up in Arkansas, she'd say stick to itness, right? The ability to see things through, even when there may not be accolades or fanfare or, all of the things that maybe we as Americans are programmed to desire. But the quiet, the stillness, and the Kojic, I was raised Kojic. They would say, still small voice.
Okay.
So
how does that show up in your early years? Like, did you know that you had this sort of quiet resolve about you? Is it something that other people saw in you? Talk to me a little bit about that.
I would say yes. As a kid, I enjoyed my alone time. And I spent a lot of time reading. And my grandmother actually was very instrumental in the first few years of my life. And she just encouraged it. She was like, here, read this book. She would read with me.
I love that.
And on my first day of Head Start, I was nervous. And we have a picture of me standing, waiting on the bus. And I'm holding on to my grandma for dear life.
Like you coming with me.
Yeah. Like I'm taking you with me. But she sent me on my way and she said, "You've got this." And luckily, she understood that, she'd already met my teacher. She knew she was a beautiful older Black woman like herself, and that I would fit right in, and that I did.
Amazing. So oftentimes when we think of quiet, it often lends itself to discussions of like personality types and things like that. And we often get into the whole introvert, extrovert dynamic. Would you label yourself as an introvert? And is that what you felt growing up?
I would say yes. I identify as an introvert. It's funny. I do feel like at different points in your life, you can put on a persona. And especially at my undergraduate institution, it was very much an active sort of culture, very extroverted culture.
Where was undergrad?
DePaul University,
okay.
Greencastle, Indiana, not to be confused with DePaul in Chicago. They really don't
Please
like
clarify
that.
for those that need that.
So it was a very active culture. And so there, when I did Myers-Briggs, I tested as an extrovert. But I was exactly, I know.
I did not know
that. Yeah. And so it was very much sort of like, I was like, oh, what? That doesn't make sense to me.
That didn't feel right?
No. And then over time, I've realized I took the test again later on in life and consistently tested as an introvert. And it was the culture of that organization that really required a sort of pseudo extroversion, that a suit of armor that I was putting on
in order to exist there, get along with everybody. And I think, I feel like we probably do that in a lot of places in our life where you just
absolutely
go along to get along kind of a thing. And so you do sort of put on this attire that is going to work for that environment. So it's interesting that that happened. I would say that was the same for me in college. That's probably a lot of us in college, honestly. So now you fully embrace your introversion?
Yes, I would say yes. And I think too, part of why I hesitate when I'm thinking about it is not necessarily the term introversion, because for me, it's very much a positive, beautiful thing about myself. But I think it's how people perceive introversion that scares me a little, in terms of thinking that introversion is something about being antisocial or not desiring meaningful relationships with other people, when in honesty, it's literally the exact opposite. And a lot of times extroversion can be associated with sort of the energy vampire sort of feel, where we're kind of just looking for the next dopamine fix. And we're taking it from wherever we can get it. But when you're looking and you're thinking about introversion, I challenge people to really understand that it's about the depth of conversation, the depth of care that I desire, right? And I desire that more than just quick hit, sort of like, oh, this was a great 2-second interaction, right?
Yeah. And I think, so we're going to get into breaking down a lot of these stereotypes and myths around what it means to be an introvert. And I know one of the things that we share in common, we both read Susan Cain's book, Quiet.
Yes.
Which is a great read for anyone, but particularly for those who may identify as being an introvert. It sort of unlocks the superpowers of what it means to be someone who identifies that way. But on a very basic level, the way I think of introversion and being introverted is just about how you respond to stimulation. There are some people who are charged externally. Those who are extroverts tend to rely on that sort of like social stimuli from the outside world to sort of fuel them. Whereas I think introverts tend to just sort of generate that from within and rely on having that time, whether it be solo time or just reflective time, to sort of generate that stimuli from within. It has nothing to do, as you said, with being antisocial. It's not like you don't like people. It's not like you don't want to engage. Now, there are times when you are forced to engage, and sometimes the sort of apprehension or anxiety around that can sort of ratchet up, and that brings on some other things, but it's not an aversion to interactions with people. It's just about where you get your juice and energy from. Would you say that's
Yes, I totally agree. And I think, you know, where you draw your energy from, where do you recharge? What are those zones in your life that you create? This again from the book Quiet. I think, you know, for me, it's always about how do I create the right mix of things? Because there is no one, no human exists in a vacuum, right? And so there are some days where sitting in my house in silence is the best thing that's ever happened to me. It's like, this is a great thing. And I just have more of those days maybe than someone else might have. But that doesn't mean that I don't crave, getting out, meeting some new people, thinking about some different ideas, exposing myself to different concepts. And the fun thing about it is, I think as an introvert, especially one who likes to live in the world, you get to find new ways to sort of explore that about yourself and express that. And the joy of that is something that I don't think everyone understands all the time either. And it's such in a world where, and where we are constantly like trying to like impress,
pleased with that gesture? Yes, absolutely. I think in the book, again, Quiet, I think she refers to it as finding your sweet spot.
Yes.
So the example that she references is like finding your optimal level of stimulation. So for example, you could be sitting in a hammock and reading a book, and that feels great. But then at a certain point, you might realize, oh, I'm rereading the same sentence multiple times. I think I need some interaction. So then you decide you want to go to brunch with people. So you go to brunch. Great. And then someone has the idea of, let's go to a block party. And then now we might have gone a little bit too far. So you're constantly trying to sort of calibrate overstimulation versus understimulation. I think that's the essential sort of context of what it means to like find your sweet spot, which is I think what you're talking about.
Exactly. That is exactly what I was referencing. And, for me, I think that ties into sort of finding your center, however you want to put it, whatever sort of language you use, whether that's religious language or whatever. But being in contact with yourself deeply enough to know how you're feeling, and then be able to respond and react and have the autonomy and the self-awareness to like, just do that. So if I need to be at home, that's okay. There might be a night though where I want to get out there and,
turn up,
shake the tail feather.
Yes, let's go.
Let's do that,
Right.
And so being okay with those things and knowing where those zones are and understanding that like, I'm a human being. That might change from hour to hour.
Yeah. And I think particularly for introverts, I think there's almost a hyper awareness of like where your bandwidth begins and ends.
Mm-hmm.
So like I have room to go this far for about this long. And then when you hit that threshold of like, I think it's about time to shut it down. And you just do that. And I think that's a healthy sort of thing to understand about yourself, because it helps you know where your limits are. It knows when you're being more authentic versus when you are kind of phoning it in. And at a certain point, you don't need to phone it in. So then you can just check out, go, whatever you need to do to sort of remove yourself from that. But I think it's just really understanding what you need to exist in a particular space.
Mm-hmm. And it is so important to sort of prioritize your well-being in that way, because it's all tied to, if one of the things that, or the takeaways from the book that really stood out to me was sort of when you're passionate about something, you may act out of character. And, I know in the Black communities, acting out of character can be taken, multiple ways.
I was
say many ways, right?
Yes.
So it could be a negative thing. But in this case, I'm meaning it in a positive way where like you may, she gives the example of a professor who, puts on this big show, but it's all in service of his broader goal, which is to inspire these students to achieve more than they ever thought they would. And he's done that multiple times throughout his career, and he wants to continue to do that. And so that transcends even his academic work, even the material that he's like spent his life studying and understanding, right? To be able to then come back to, yeah, I did all of that. The humbleness, right? And the character that that says about that human being to say, no, my desire is not just a function of all the things I've buried my head
Yeah.
in these books, right? But it's about the character of the person that these young people are becoming. I want to be a pivotal, structural part of that memory that puts them on the right track, whatever that may be, a moral track, a good, track, an intellectual track, whatever that may be.
That trajectory.
Yeah.
So
That's
talk to
beautiful.
me a little bit about, so you identify as an introvert. Cool. How does that work for you in professional spaces, social spaces? Like, what are some of the things that you've had to confront in order to, again, navigate a world that, quite frankly, is now built for extroverts, even though that's not, if you sort of think about sort of the evolution of, certainly in America, but just the global nature of how we live.
Mm.
We weren't always that way. We weren't always trying to sort of put on armor to sort of impress people. That sort of came about as we sort of moved to cities and different people were coming together, and you were sort of trying to almost impress people so that you would continue to work and be considered for opportunities. And so we've evolved in that way over time, but that's not always who we were. So to that extent, the workplace is what it is now. How do you navigate those spaces that clearly aren't meant for people who maybe approach the world in the way that you do?
Mm. That's a good point. And I think, I don't know if, I think I did this naturally, especially after college, where I chose a career in analysis. And all the introverts out there are probably like, oh, yeah, I'm probably doing some form of analysis right at this moment, right?
Talk about
But I chose that function, and something just spoke to me in college. And there was one class in particular that said, he was teaching, we had just gotten this new professor, and he was teaching about Excel. And I was like, most people would look at Microsoft Excel and go, I don't want to touch that.
That's absolutely what I said.
But I was like, oh man, I need that. And so I went into the class and I was like, oh, I'm really good at the mechanics of this, one. And two, I enjoy analysis, and therefore I enjoy math. Now, I had never been like a grade. I mean, I got A's in math, but like, I was never like, but I was never like, oh gosh, applied math,
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to be a rocket scientist or something, and so then once I took that class, I realized, oh, I like going deep into a subject. And so I didn't have the language for it yet, of introversion, of, all of these things. But I did understand that analysis allowed me the kind of depth and the kind of quiet, the stillness to like quiet a very loud world.
Mm.
And not only that, but in that role, in the analysis role, it was required of me. So it was like, you're requiring something that I can do.
Right. You're like, that's in my wheelhouse.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And so, when I, stepped out into the world, I found a job as a planning and strategic planning analyst. And that was my first taste of really being able to dig into the numbers of healthcare and understand things about, how care is delivered. And so that became my window into understanding, from a very high level, but also then at a granular level. So a very intense analysis. And I was like, oh, I like that. That's cool. And so since then, I just inherently understood that was something that I needed to do. And so I built that skill set and built onto it and just kept building pieces.
And just adding it.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing to find a career or an industry or sector that kind of speaks to who you are.
Mm.
I think I probably struggled a little more in that realm because I felt like I did a number of different things, but I worked in international development and I enjoyed that, and it was hard, but I did it. And then I went completely the direction and became an actor.
Yeah.
And fun fact, a lot of actors are actually introverts, because it's character.
Makes total sense to me.
Yeah, you're putting on a
Makes total
character, and
sense to
you kind of wear this thing, and then you take it off, and then you go
And how much of that
decompress.
work is done with that script,
Oh, that's
right?
you.
Sitting there,
It's all
thinking,
you.
Understanding that character, being one with that character.
It's the analysis.
It's
once again.
analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the same skills at work. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, it took me a while to sort of figure out like what are the things that I need to sort of put in place in order to find those opportunities that are really going to speak to me. So then talk to me about now, kind of in present day, you as, a professional, as a leader, what types of things do you sort of bring to the work you do now? And we'll get to the newsletter in just a second, but just in terms of like characteristics that are important for you to sort of manifest in the work that you're doing.
Yeah. I think for me, what's become really evident for me, or that sets me apart as an MBA'd person.
I love that. For me. An MBA'd person.
Sometimes I do feel like a fish out of water. And I'm sure that's also because, us introverts like to do things on our own, and we don't have as great a structure for like coming together. But what I found in my leadership experiences, especially post business school, is that I bring a sort of moral picture to whatever work I'm doing. And I have had to recognize that that's okay. And teach myself not only that that's okay, but that's a good trait and that's a good thing to bring to the table.
Yes.
And not only that, but it's highly valuable, whether or not, the folks you're working with recognize it or not.
Appreciate it, see it. It's still important for
Exactly.
you, and you should obviously lean into that.
Exactly. And you will find the people who agree that those things are necessary for the functioning of a good business, because, when I think about, one of my last projects, it was important for me to make clear that as a leader, I'm looking to bring lots of, new ideas, lots of good content, but I'm also looking to bring pay equity to the women on staff that have been putting in work for a number of years and not getting a fair share, right? I'm looking to innovate how we give grants, but I'm also looking to ensure that, the young Black, creative grant makers that we have on staff have an avenue to express themselves through their work in this organization, right? And so being able to bring all of those things to the table, finding those spaces, sometimes it can seem like it'll never happen, but it will. And I think maybe sometimes you got to build it.
Absolutely, which is a great segue to the newsletter. But before I do that, I just wanted to add, I think particularly for somebody who is in a leadership position, I think you touched on a couple of things that I think are really important. Whether you identify as an introvert or not, but taking the time to be quiet and to actually kind of assess things in a sort of non-judgmental way, I think is really important to kind of see what's there. And I think having that quiet time allows for creative ideas, creative solutions in a way that's not just you trying to like talk through a thing, but being very intentional about, I feel like you want to.
Well,
but you know what I'm saying, because we've talked about this.
If you're receiving a sermon, you should receive it, right?
Okay.
No, but I just agree, right? Deeply. I think I've seen it many times where, we get caught up in trying to hear our own voices. And I think one of the things that the book Quiet, I thought really drove home for me in a way was how there were conditions under which introverted CEOs operated better. And not only did they operate better in terms of financial outcomes, but their people were happier, right? And a lot of those organizations were organizations where people had the freedom to do what they needed to do with their jobs. And not only that, but they had the training and the tools and the support, right? And a lot of times, I think it's not just about being introverted or extroverted. It's also about learning from the different styles of
Yes.
existence, right?
Yes.
And so when we look at how can we learn from introverted leaders, I think that's a particularly important point in this moment where we have a lot of companies that just want to be bigger, louder, faster, breaking things.
Which was oftentimes the motto, and maybe still is the motto, particularly in tech. In a lot of industries, you see like move fast and break things. Like, to be clear, just because you are the loudest voice in the room or you speak most frequently, it doesn't mean you have the best ideas.
And in fact, Quiet again points out that statistically, again, as an analyst,
Talk data
is not the case.
Yeah.
There is no correlation between talking and good outcomes, right? And I don't know many people that have said, hey, I really need to come up with an innovative idea. Let me start a corporate committee.
Yeah, no.
So when we're thinking about quiet, when we're thinking about innovation, when we're thinking about quiet and we're thinking about sort of that resolve, right? To do something great or to change something or to really create space for someone, for ourselves, for each other. That's what quiet can do, right? And that doesn't mean then we don't need to come together and have a discussion. I mean, talking with each other builds trust and confidence in each other. And that is a very important aspect of what it means to be extroverted.
Yeah.
But it is also just equally true that in order to come to the table with good ideas, there has to be some quiet in there.
Got to take a beat, take a minute. And I think it's the irony is not lost on me that as somebody who I'm probably more of an ambivert, I think I do have a little bit of both. But again, I'm team introvert in my mind. As somebody who does kind of identify more on the introverted side, that having a podcast now is something that is not necessarily expected, but it's because I did the thing that you just talked about, was really sort of sitting with my own thoughts and thinking about what is the contribution that I want to make? How do I want to impact the spaces that I'm in? How do I want to impact the world in whatever way we think about that?
Yeah.
And so that's how this was born. And I think that's a perfect segue to talk about your newsletter. So can you talk about the genesis of that? What made you want to start it? And what is the goal for the work that you do in that space?
Yeah. I started the Perspectives for Progress newsletter out of a desire to understand the multicultural business landscape. Because, I felt like there's a lot of things that we love to market in America, soda,
Yes.
different, all kinds of food, all of those things. We love to see those ads. But, it's just true that what we don't necessarily love to market as much is the information that, especially historically underrepresented communities need in order to overcome the wage, wealth, and income gap, right?
I would say that information is often intentionally hidden.
Again,
my opinion, but
preach. And so I think too, the funny thing about that intention is sometimes people are well-meaning in hiding that information, right? In some ways, they're saying, hey, like, we don't need to talk about this because it might upset this group or that group. Yet, when we look at Wall Street firms where, everyone has to turn in order to get capital to start that business, to build strong, all you see are bros. and not us,
Black and brown folks.
not black and brown bros. It's a very specific type of white man that has gone to an elite sort of institution. And so then you go, well, isn't that just the foundation of the wage, wealth, and income gap?
Yes.
That's all there is to it, right? And so I think for me, when I think about, okay, what do we need? I think what really inspired me to start Perspectives for Progress was the Green Book,
Mm. Yeah.
And
Say a little more about the Green Book for those that may not know.
Yeah. So, again, my grandmother comes from the South, Arkansas. And, back in the day, they were sharecroppers. And so, when her auntie found out that her father had passed, she whisked them out of the South in the dark of night to protect them from basically being taken advantage of and not being able to finish their education because they could have been adopted by God knows who.
Anyone.
And so back then, right, there were a lot of scary places for Black people throughout, the United States, the greater United States. It still is, but, that's another story. And so the Green Book was created as a guidebook to, guide Black people as they were looking for safe places. They wanted to get in their cars and travel like everybody else,
hotels where you could stay, restaurants that would actually serve you and seat you. And it was depicted in the movie with Mahershala Ali.
Yep. Fantastic movie. So you can then get a feel for, the economy, right? There was an economy. There was an underpinning for, and I was telling somebody the other day, there's in a lot of ways, in some ways I say, I romanticize that because it shows the ingenuity and the creativity of, Black culture, Black people, even for people who had been in the wilderness for as long as we were, to be like, I'm gonna make this book.
We're gonna create this thing for you to navigate
for all of us.
Yeah.
And at great risk, mind you. I mean, Ida B. Wells exists, right? I mean, they ran her out of town quick, right? So we need to really consider that. And so the reason I started this newsletter is because it is very much a marketing job. We have to get the story out about how we can overcome these barriers, right? People that are overcoming these barriers, because we've got to start to come together and notice and take notice, right, of the ways in which we are overcoming these challenges, or that we could potentially overcome these challenges. Somebody has to have the tools and the information. It's basically I'm writing and looking for the news that I wanted served up to me when I was coming into the workforce.
Digestible, not easy, but compact, concise way to sort of understand these are the things I need to know. And this is going to help me sort of take, what I'm doing to the next level.
Exactly.
And the thing that I love, first of all, I love that you decided to do that. And the thing that I think is so interesting about that choice is that you can go back through history and see the number of people who identified as introverts doing amazing things, just doing it in the way that made sense for them. Whether it's an Eleanor Roosevelt, Rosa Parks, I mean, even some Dr. Seuss, fun fact, was an introvert. Mm-hmm. And so it's really just about figuring out what is your way into the world? What is your way of providing that information that people need? It's not you, standing on a pulpit. It's not you shouting in the streets. We're going to create a newsletter and so in terms of pushing that information out there, how are you making sure that the great information that you're putting together is getting to the folks that really need to see it and hear it?
Yeah. Well, obviously, at some point you've got to speak up. And so this podcast, right?
Here we are.
Or, wherever it may be, I espouse it. And, as an introvert who is a very much self sort of and have an intense inner world, right? I also want to be proud of my own work. And so I've been working very hard to get to a place where I'm like, this is it. This is the voice that I am happy to bring forth into the world. And not only just bring forth, but then market and talk about and all of those things. And so I've been working very hard to get to that place. And I feel like I finally sort of got there.
Congratulations. I'm just going to say, when you finally find the voice that you actually want to share, that's everything. And I think, kind of in a similar way, like even doing something like this, as small as it may feel, because, it's a podcast, okay? But like, it's important for me to have a space where I can do that same thing, where I feel like my voice matters. It's the voice I want to share. I'm talking about the things that I want to talk about, sharing the information that I want to share. And so, like, doing that in whatever way you can is huge. So, congratulations for discovering that for yourself and celebrating yourself for it, because I don't do that enough.
And that's important. I think, like, when I think about, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, introverts celebrate differently. I think
How do we celebrate, please?
Yeah, it's fine. With a little analysis, probably. Or
data,
a book.
These numbers are not sufficient.
No, but I think of course, we celebrate like everyone else, and we're gonna have some. I'm probably gonna have a delicious dessert of some sort after this, right? So, like, I'm excited about that. So, like, I love it. But at the same time, I think it's important to celebrate the work that you're putting in. Even, I saw you doing work before this, and we were talking about like all the work leading up to doing something like this in a way that feels good and feels authentic, but also feels analyzed and feels like thought through. And so when I think about like, what an introvert can bring to the cultural space, right? It's that kind of care. Because it's okay. It's okay. Even when it comes to like, of course, I want to go to Beyonce's concert and just shake it, right? Like, of course I want to do that, right? And I'm going to do that again. But I also love taking a step back and going, I should take a moment to appreciate what Beyonce did for all of those beautiful Black Olympians, starting a conversation, using her music in that way. That's a beautiful thing, right? And so if we don't have quiet, we never even get to explore that, right?
Yeah, I feel like particularly when you take that time, you consider the nuances and the layers to things in a way that other people don't necessarily do. And so I think it's really important to make those observations and then to think about like, how can you build on that? Because that's where the creativity lies. And I think sometimes in a world where you're just kind of rushing to put out the next great thing, you don't understand like what really made that work or what made that moment special. Why did that resonate with so many people? That's the creativity, and that's sort of the energy that you want to tap into. And that I think you can really only find when you like take a moment and really sort of sit there with it. So I think it's really about finding like those magical moments. So what does the future look like as a self-identified, quiet, potentially introverted individual? What does the future look like for you? What do you hope? Where do you hope things go?
Yeah. I think it might be odd to some people to hear the idea of, leadership and entrepreneurship mixed with, being introverted. I think because of just how culture tends to stereotype introverts. But I will say that for me, I'd love to continue on that path of leading organizations, bringing a kind of rigor and excellence and care. I will continue to do that. I love doing that. It brings me joy to implement policies and and build markets. I mean, what could be more exciting than doing that kind of work, especially when you know that you're doing it in ways that will help historically underrepresented people, grow, change, learn, and hopefully we're planting seeds, baby. Like, it isn't just about well, I'm going to do this, but I want to water the seeds, right?
Yeah.
I want to plant them and I want to water them.
And watch it grow.
Absolutely. And that you can see probably even in my demeanor, it excites.
I mean, the excitement is palpable already.
Yeah.
I love that. And again, I just want to say hats off to you for, creating a space where you can begin to see some of that happening and just sort of that giving back and doing it in a way that makes sense for who you are and what you bring to the table. Yeah. So I just want to thank you for the conversation today. I mean, look, we're friends, obviously. I already felt pretty good coming in, but I feel quite validated, especially now. Just talking to you and, just recognizing, again, what you bring to the world and how you're doing it in your own way. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. And I feel the exact same way.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, everybody. Take care. Have a good one.